Seventh, eighth grade literature. Great news for you. We're going to finish our book this week. I know it's exciting. We're already in our last month of school, and turns out you are in the last week for this class. I'm actually going to give you until the end of next week to finish your book because there is one last assignment in there that I need you to do on your own. I want to give you some time to work on it. But let's do the next two poems that are on the schedule today. Let's start with the first one, which we're going to dig deep into this one. It's a good one. It's called A Poison Tree by William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. I sunned it with smiles, and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see, my foe outstretched beneath the tree. Okay, let's look at the notes that are in your textbook. Okay, so at first read, which we just did, the poem seems like a straightforward story of a man who poisons his enemy. He says, I had some anger issues with my foe. I watered it. I created this poison inside of me to kill my enemy. But when you take time to really pay attention to the imagery, you see that there is a lot of depth to this story. So it says, when one takes the time to really pay attention to the imagery, remember imagery, it's anything that uses the five senses, okay? The reader sees it as so much deeper. First, the reader should note that although the speaker has a friend, he is also predisposed to have an enemy. He says, I had a problem with my friend. I told him about it. We got over it. I had a problem with my foe, my enemy, and I didn't tell him about it, and it just grew and grew and grew, which means he already has an enemy at the very beginning of this poem. It's not like somebody did something to tick him off. He already had an enemy. He has a foe before he becomes angry. He is willing to forgive his friend, but not his enemy. So one can picture the speaker watering a tree with tears and sunning it with lies until it grows a poison apple designed to tempt his enemy. This should seem really familiar, an apple being used to tempt. In the Bible, we don't know what the fruit was in the Garden of Eden, but artists started putting an apple in Eve's hand because it fit the shape of her hand very nicely. And so the idea of an apple on a tree and being tempted, it takes us back to that first sin in the garden. And the person who actually created this temptation or who encouraged Eve to fall to that temptation was Satan. God put it out there, but told his creation, do not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They could have asked for it to be removed. They could have gone and eaten from any other fruit, but Satan actually led her to that specific tree. It says, when all goes as planned, the foe sneaks into the garden, steals the apple, and dies from the poison. Now the reader, we need to go back and dig even deeper. Even though the tree is designed to poison the enemy, it also poisons the speaker. By hanging on to his wrath and bitterness, he becomes just as ill and dead as the foe he killed. The final clue to the speaker's spiritual destruction is the statement that he is glad of his foe's death. And that is a big tell. When you are glad when someone else is hurt, that's not an appropriate response when someone dies and feeling happy about that. So let's go through this poem. We've kind of gotten a little bit of background because of the notes, but let's go through it line by line like we always do and find out a little more about it. Okay, let's start with, I was angry with my friend. We have all had anger issues with friends. Sometimes a friend will say or do something and you'll think, that wasn't a fair treatment of me. As my friend, you should know better than to talk to me that way or to do that thing that I wanted to be part of. Sometimes it's very difficult in friendships because you want to reach out and go beyond your few friendships to more friendships, or you want to reach out to somebody who also needs a friend. And that can be a little complicated sometimes because our friends can get jealous or we can get jealous at our friends. And that's when you have to physically and mentally decide that you are going to grow up. Okay? It's okay to be angry, but look at the second line. It says, I told my wrath My wrath did end. That's part of growing up. That's part of maturing. To have an anger with your friend because of something he or she did or because of something you did and their reaction to it, that's okay to be angry, but you need to go back and talk about why you were angry. And sometimes you may find out that you were out of line. Sometimes they will admit that they were out of line. Sometimes they won't admit it, but you still have to take the time to say, okay, I'm angry. This is why I was angry. Sometimes it's just your friend doesn't know you're angry, and it's just a matter of sucking it up and saying, okay, why am I angry? And deciding whether or not you need to share that information. Because you might be angry over something really stupid that they didn't even notice. And you may just realize, oh, that was just me. I was just being stupid. So in that case, you have to talk to yourself and say, hey, grow up, stupid. Okay, but let's look at the third line. It says, I was angry with my foe. This is somebody who is already not liked or an enemy. Okay, now we don't have a lot of in-your-face enemies in our world. We have a few. We have a few people that we simply don't care for, so we avoid them. We can talk to them politely, but we don't necessarily get along with them. Sometimes you might actually have moments where you can talk to someone that you normally don't care for, but and you get along for a brief period of time, but it's not somebody you want to hang out with all the time. Then there are some times when there's people that just can't seem to do or say anything nice to you, and you avoid them because of that. You can lend them a pen one week, and then the next week they'll claim that, you stole their pen, and you're like, what is going on here? And we know that that happens. Okay. There's just people that just do that kind of stuff. But here's somebody who's angry with their enemy. There's a problem there. You can have an enemy that you're not angry with. The anger is you. That is your issue, not your enemy's issue. Okay. There are people in my life, or they're not really in my life anymore. There are people that I've met in my life that were friends and became people that I would consider foes, not necessarily enemies, but people that I just don't want to be around. And so I can not be around them. You have a little different issue because when you are in junior high and high school, you are pretty much slammed together with a group of people that you did not choose, and you have to learn how to live with them. And sometimes ignoring them is not an issue because you're sharing the same classroom space with them, you're sharing the same locker space with them. And one of the reasons that schools are set up, and one of the reasons you don't get a lot of sympathy, unfortunately, from adults is because we've all had to go through it, because that's how you figure out how to have these interactive communications. And it's not easy. I'm going to be really blunt with you. It's not easy. I've dealt with my share of bullies. You have to learn how to survive. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that bullying is okay. I don't agree with that at all. And I think that people who are physically threatening other people should be removed. Okay. But for a lot of times, the term bully gets overused. If somebody says something that you might think is unkind, but it's just a one-time thing that they've said, they're not bullying you. Maybe they just made a mistake. Maybe they just said something stupid. Okay, so you have to look for a repeated instance here. And if somebody says something that's mean and rude to you, you have the ability to go to them and say, you know what, I didn't appreciate that. Please don't talk to me that way. Okay, and you can do it nicely. So here is a person who is angry with their friend. They're able to talk it out, and the wrath, the anger ends. They have a foe. They don't want to talk to that person. They don't explain why they're angry to the person, or maybe they can't. Maybe it is a bully that they can't approach, or maybe they don't even express it to themselves. They just bottle it up. But they told it not, my wrath did grow. We can get angry and then build on that anger and anger and anger, and eventually it will just kind of explode. So look at how he is causing his wrath or his anger to grow. He waters it with fears. The idea that you're afraid of this person. Night and morning with my tears. Oy, yeah. I remember those junior high mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed. I remember those adult mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed and go to school, knowing that you're going to be facing somebody who isn't kind to you. I understand that. So he suns it with smiles and soft, deceitful wiles. Now we're getting into a little more of a layering here. It's not just, I don't want to be next to this person. I'm afraid of this person. It makes me sad and depressed when I'm around this person. Now we're seeing another side of this. He suns it with smiles. Not only does he have a foe that he doesn't express his anger to, he fakes it. He smiles at his foe. He makes it seem like he gets along. Oh, everything's cool. We're all good. He says, I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. Wiles are being cagey. You know, they're like making people believe one thing when you're really doing another. It's being slick. So he is sunning it with smiles and slickness. He's getting this person to think that he's an actual friend, or that he believes that his foe is a friend and wants to be friendly with him. It grew, we're still talking about wrath, it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. So he's talking about creating this tree of wrath. That's why it's called the poison tree. So as he continually waters it with fears, waters it with tears, suns it with smiles and deceitful wiles, the tree grows and eventually it bears fruit. And the fruit it bears is an apple. Again, we've talked about the symbology of apples. They're supposed to be about temptation. And my foe beheld it shine. Now the foe is a foe for a reason, because when they see this beautiful bright apple and they know, and he knew that it was mine, the foe knows the apple belongs to somebody else, but he wants it for himself. So there is obviously a reason for this guy to be a foe. And into my garden stole. We're not talking literal garden here. We're talking about metaphor, okay? But it's such a strong metaphor. You can picture or imagine, using imagery, this tree growing. You can imagine, you can see in your mind's eye this bright, beautiful apple growing, and this garden where this guy is sneaking in. When the night had veiled the pole, that's the idea that it is so dark at night that the North Star isn't even available anymore, because it's not shining anymore because of the Earth's rotation. So he into my garden stole when night had veiled the pole, very, very late night, early morning. In the morning, glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. This person who created this poison tree and this poison apple as a trap for his foe is glad when that trap is sprung and his foe is outstretched or dead beneath the tree. Now, that's where we learn that little bit in the morning, glad I see. That glad I see is, good. It's over. He's dead. Okay. That is a really hard thing to think, that we would be glad about somebody's death. It's not always an easy thing to think about, but some people are. I mean, if they've been around someone who's abused them or who has tortured them, or, well, that's abuse too. They might be glad to know that it's all over. But in reality, when you hold on to that kind of thing and you're actually glad when someone passes, when someone dies, that's a problem, because that shows that you have had the wrath actually infect you as well. So with this poet, the speaker is telling you, look, I had this anger and I held on to it and I watered it and I nurtured it and I created this tree and this poison apple and it poisoned my foe and I went, good. Okay, that means he was infected with a poison too. Of course he was, because he's the one who created it and it infected him. So it's worked on both levels. It infected the person who was angry and the person who was angry at. So it gives us some good insight about how we need to treat others and how we need to open up. Now, I'm not saying go out and find your diarist foe and have a sit-down conversation, but you might have to have a sit-down conversation with yourself and with the Lord. You might have to take some time to pray and say, okay, Lord, I can't stand this person. Show me how to survive without that kind of anger. I mean, if it's not too bad, you could talk to a person. I mean, if it's just someone who annoys you, you can, tell, that really made me angry when you said that about me. If it's someone who's punched you in the face, don't go and talk to them. Don't do that. Don't set yourself up like that. No, don't do that. Okay, so here we have the poison tree. We've gone through it once. We did the notes from your book, and now we are going to do it one more time so that you can see how it all just beautifully fits together. The Poison Tree by William Blake. I hope you liked it. Let's see if I have any more notes. I don't think I do. Okay, so let's do it one more time, and then you can do your homework on this poem after this. A Poison Tree, William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. Okay, so we could visualize. The whole point of this exercise is to read poetry that sparks the imagination by using imagery, using the five senses. And we definitely got that here. And here, a much nicer and more friendly poem, I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose by Emily Dickinson. She is also going to help us to see what she is seeing. Her speaker is going to see what we see. And I really love this poem, even though it's very simple. It's very beautiful. But because it's Emily Dickinson, you have to kind of take it apart anyway. And then once you get it, it just flows. But Emily Dickinson had a very different type of rhyme scheme. So it's a little difficult sometimes to read and understand her until you get into her head, where you get used to her rhyme scheme by reading a lot of her poetry and by taking them apart and finding out what they actually mean. Some people say you can read all of her poems to the tune of Yellow Rose of Texas. Others say you can use the Gilligan's Island theme song. Okay, and probably none of you know what either of those things are, but that's okay. Let's go through it once and then take it apart and go through it again, like we always do. Thank you, Lawrence Perrine, for teaching us that method. I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose, Emily Dickinson. I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeples swam in amethyst. The news like squirrels ran. The hills untied their bonnets, the bobolinks began. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. But how he set, I know not. There seemed a purple stile, that little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while, till when they reached the other side, a dominie in gray put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. I can hear you all right now going, what? What? This is supposed to be about a sunrise? Why didn't she just say the sun came up? It was pretty, looky, purple. Because that's not what Emily Dickinson does. So let's take it apart, shall we? Because we're smart people. We can do this. So I'll tell you how the sun rose. So obviously we're talking about a sunrise. So picture in your head a sunrise. Okay, now also picture in your head that this is a person who lives on the East Coast. So sunrise would be the most dramatic part of the day. Out here on the West Coast, our sunrises, and it's pretty much just gray and then boom, sunshine. Okay, on the East Coast, it's a little reverse because they get the sunrise first. We get the sunset. Okay, that's where we get most of our color. They get most of their color in the morning. Okay, so how does the sun rise in her beautiful world? A ribbon at a time. Ribbons used to be a really big fashion accessory. I mean, for years. I mean, for hundreds of years, ribbons were a fashion accessory because everyone could afford them. So you could get really broad ribbons, you can get little thin ribbons, you can get ribbons of all different colors. Even Charles Dickens talks about the very poorest women in his books. They could at least afford to buy ribbons to decorate themselves, to accessorize. So ribbons were huge. Everybody knew what ribbons were about, and you can get them in all different colors. So how does the sun rise? It rises a color ribbon at a time. So you think about the color ribbons in the sky as they float upwards as the sun rises. The steeples, those are church steeples. Those are the tall, pointy things on tops of churches. We don't have one because typically Baptist churches don't really have a lot of steeples. Typically, steeples were built to have belfries, which is where a bell hangs and then it calls people to worship before alarm clocks were a thing. Okay, so they would ring the bell about a half hour before church started, so people would know it's time to set out from home to get to the church. We're talking horse and buggy days, way back in the day. Okay. So the steeples, or the very highest points in the church, were swimming in amethyst. That means the air and the sky looked purple. I love amethyst. I mean, I like amethyst carmine too, but I'm talking about the color purple, which is really beautiful. And if you can see behind me, my bookshelves and the purple color that shows through, I purposely wanted, when I designed this room, I wanted to have open backed bookcases so you could see my purple walls through them because I'm that fascinated by purple. Yeah, I love purple. Purple. It's good stuff. Okay. Weirdly enough, though, I really don't like the flavor of lavender, but I love amethyst. Okay, news like squirrels ran. Okay, if you've ever done any kind of driving up in the mountains at all and squirrels just dart out across the road, you know that squirrels are, first of all, fearless, they're crazy, and they're fast. So the news that the sun is coming up is running very, very fast, like a squirrel runs. The hills untied their bonnets. Think of the hills, we're surrounded with hills. Think of the hills being very dark, still shrouded in the darkness of the morning, the early morning, and suddenly the sun shines on them and you can see the brightness of the green. So it's like they're untying their bonnets, taking their hat off, and you can see what's underneath that beautiful green and floral hill. The bobolinks began. A bobolink is a bird. Okay, they sing. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. It seems like the sunrise comes up a ribbon at a time. Everything just kind of comes to life when the sun rises. And she's like, oh, look, it just happened. It happens quick, but it happens just a little bit at a time. I mean, a little bit by little bit, but then fast all of a sudden. He said, but how he set, I know not. Now she's getting into the sunset. She's saying, I don't even know when the sun set because it just happened so fast that all of a sudden I'm just looking around. I'm like, oh, it's nighttime. I have done that on occasion. I've known a lot of people who've done that on occasion, actually. It's late afternoon. You're enjoying the last of the afternoon sun. Sometimes I'm outside watering my garden and I realize I'm not seeing as well as I usually do. And it's because all of a sudden it got dark out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's nighttime now. It was just daylight like a minute ago. So now she's talking about the sunset and how quickly it can happen. She says there seemed a purple style. So we have the purple coming back because when we're talking about shadows in sunsets and sunrises, that purple color can come around, especially on the ground level. I love it. Every once in a while, we'll be outside like at sunset and the air itself will seem purple. I love those moments. Those are pretty cool. So there seemed a purple stile. A stile is something we don't really use a lot out west, but a stile is a staircase or a ladder that goes over a fence. So a fence between two properties or even two fields. If a farmer has more than one field that's blocked off or fenced off, the stile will be like a little staircase where you can go up over the fence and then down the other side. That's a stile. Okay. So there seemed a purple stile that little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while. That's the idea, that it seemed like the sunshine was out, it was playing, it's walking up this stile. They were the little boys and girls, those are the yellow sunbeams, climbing up on this purple stile. And then all of a sudden, they're all on the other side and they've disappeared. All of a sudden, that sunshine is gone. A dominie in gray. A dominie is a Scottish school teacher, and they tended to wear all gray clothing. And so it's the idea that all the little boys and girls climb over the stile, they're on the other side, and now this gray clad teacher is leading them away. So it says, a dominie in gray put gently up the evening bars. That's the idea of putting up the bars to block the stile, okay? And led the flock away. Like, that's his little kids that he's taking off. So she's doing a metaphor within a metaphor, that the dominie is actually leading sheep, which are his students. So the dominie in gray puts gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. So the sun rises a little bit at a time. It sets very, very quickly, almost before you know it's happening. So let's take a look at the notes real quick. It says, Emily Dickinson uses similes. These are comparisons using like and as. And metaphor, that's comparisons exchanging one thing for another, to describe the growing quickness of the sunrise and then the slow, almost unnoticed slowness of the sunset. Her comparisons run the gamut. Gamut was the old name for scale, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's the gamut. That's the scale. Okay, so her comparisons run the gamut from other things found in nature to human inventions to people themselves. So we have a stile, that's a ladder or a set of steps that enable a person to easily climb over a wall. And then there's a picture of a dominie. Okay, it's a school teacher or tutor with a religious background, usually of Scottish origin. Okay, I like that style for explaining what a style is, but I've also seen some that kind of go to the side, on the side, and then you have a little platform, and then on the side on the other way. If you've ever watched the 6-hour-long Pride and Prejudice, in the very first episode, you see her climbing over a stile, walking over a stile, and then jumping into the mud because she's young. Okay, so let's do this one more time. Now that we know what everything means, let's go through it again. I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeples swam in amethyst. The news like squirrels ran. The hills untied their bonnets. The bobolinks began. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun, but how he set, I know not. There seemed a purple stile that little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while, till when they reached the other side, a dominie in gray put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. So a little bit at a time, we see the sun setting. We don't even notice it's passing until it's too late. Okay, that's it for this lecture. We're going to have one more lecture this week. And then if you look at the very end of your book, you're going to notice I'm going to give you another poem to do, an original. You won't have to turn that in until next Friday or whenever you get it done. Okay, but in the meantime, get the homework for these 2 poems finished, and I will talk to you again on Thursday. Have a good night.